How's it going, YouTube? I'm Landon. Have you ever wondered what are the deadliest diseases ever? Well, I've constructed the top 10 list of the deadliest diseases of all time. But first, let me ask you this. What top 10 do you want to see next? And what do you think is the deadliest disease of all time? Let's get right into it. Coming in at number 10. Tuberculosis, also called TB. This is a bacteria that typically attacks the lungs. This bacteria can also affect your brain, your spine, and your kidney. Tuberculosis is fatal and is widespread. 1/3 of the world's population has been affected by this. In fact, there's new infections occurring in about 1% of the population each year. In 2007, there's an estimated 13.7 million people who had the bacteria. In 2013, there was 9 million new cases and about 1.5 million associated deaths. Moving on to the number 9 spot. We're talking about SARS. The long form of SARS is Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome, but for short and simplicity, let's call it SARS. This is a viral respiratory illness caused by a coronavirus. SARS was first reported in Asia back in 2003, and over the next few months, the disease spread to more than 24 other countries. SARS is spread through close person-to-person contact. There were 8,098 confirmed cases of SARS from November 2002 all the way to July 2003, with 774 deaths. There's currently no cure for SARS, but research to find a vaccine is ongoing. Alright, now we have at the number 8 spot, we're talking measles. Measles is a highly contagious respiratory disease. This is a deadly disease because it's airborne. The vaccine for this has become available since 2005, but before this, there has been an estimated 2.6 million deaths each year. But recently, back in 2013, 84% of children worldwide received 1 dose of the measles vaccine, and this was all by their first birthday, and this was through the health services. Since this vaccine, it's helped prevented 15.6 million deaths. This was developed by Maurice Hilleman. He was an American microbiologist who specialized in vaccines. He has developed over 36 of them, including mumps, hepatitis A and B, chickenpox, meningitis, and ammonia, and that's just to name a few. He has also been credited for saving the most amount of lives than any other medical scientist in the 20th century. How crazy is that? Now coming in at number 7, we're talking about yellow fever. This is also known as yellow jack or the yellow plague. Yellow fever is transmitted to humans via bites by mosquitoes. Ouch. This disease mostly occurs in South America or Africa. It's estimated 200,000 new cases every single year, with 30,000 people losing their lives. Nearly 1 billion people live in these areas where it's very common. Now that is a very scary statistic. What beats yellow fever? Well, coming in at the number 6 spot, we're talking about HIV, also known as human immunovirus, or for simplicity again, let's just call it HIV. This attacks the white blood cells in your body, which helps your body to fight disease. This disease can be managed, but AIDS, the final stage of the infection, has claimed the lives of more than 39 million people. One of the most famous big athletes to ever first have this was Magic Johnson in the NBA, and it was so scary that he stopped playing ball because he didn't want to get in contact with other people. This was so new and it was such a mystery to what it was. So HIV is transmitted through the exchange of bodily fluids. There's 35 million people in the world right now currently living with HIV or AIDS. And get this, 1 in 7 people are living with HIV that they had no idea that they have. That is so crazy, but let's move on to number 5. Malaria. Malaria is a life-threatening disease caused by parasites, and these are transmitted through people by mosquitoes. I think we're learning that mosquitoes are really bad. Malaria is preventable and curable. However, without treatment, it can be fatal. About 3.2 billion people, which is about half the population of the world, are at risk of malaria. Back in 2013, 198 million people has had it, and there's been 584,000 people who have died. People living in the poorest countries are the most vulnerable to this. 90% of malaria deaths have occurred in Africa, and most of these deaths are children under 5 years old. We are almost at the number 1 spot, but coming in at number 4, we have the most recent scare, Ebola. Ebola first appeared in 1976, where there was an outbreak in Zaire, which is in Africa. This deadly disease got its name from the Ebola River in which it first appeared near. The fatal rate for this disease is 90%. The virus is transmitted from person to person via direct contact with bodily fluids. Symptoms include muscle weakness and pain, and you have high fever. You start heating up very quickly. There has been 8,468 people who has lost their lives, and this is in the countries with the widespread transmission. There has been 1 case of Ebola in the UK. And it was 39-year-old Pauline Cafferty. She was diagnosed in December of 2014. And this is after she came back after volunteering in Sierra Leone in Africa. Smallpox. 500 million people have died in the 20th century. This is so fatal. So I'm talking about 1901 all the way to 2000. Smallpox was greatly feared because of the fatal rate of 30 to 35%. There's been physical evidence of this from a mummy. And this is a mummy of a pharaoh who ruled in Egypt. The last natural occurring case happened in Somalia in 1977. There's no cure for it, but there was a vaccine to prevent it. Which means as soon as everyone has a vaccine, no one's gonna have it. Smallpox is not gonna be in existence again. Coming in at number 2, I'm talking about the 1918 flu pandemic. The 1918 flu pandemic was an unusual, deadly influenza pandemic that involved the H1N1 influenza virus. The deadly flu virus attacked more than 1/3 of the world's population, and within months it had killed more than 50 people. The 1918 flu pandemic almost took the human race. So the 50 million people that died, this is the most amount of people in the quickest amount of time ever in history. The global mortality rate from 1918 to 1919 pandemic is unknown, but an estimated 10 to 20% of those people who were infected died. So this is why the total can range from about 50 million all the way up to 100 million people. So now we have come to the most deadliest disease of all time. It was very scary, but I'm talking about the plague. The plague is also referred to as the Black Death. It was one of the most devastating pandemics in human history. When it was at its most virulent in the Middle Ages, it killed off 60% of London's population, and that's 50% of Paris and 40% of Egypt's population, which is approximately 75 to 100 million people. Bodies were piled up inside and outside of city walls, and this is until massive graves could be dug. There was just nowhere to put these bodies, there's so many. And because of this contributed to the bad air, which helped to spread and grow this disease. So there you have it, that was the top 10 most deadliest disease of all time. Were you surprised by any of these? Or what disease do you think should have made it? Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you learned a thing or two, and I'll see you in the next video.